The elevator doors opened on the 42nd floor of the Preston Tower, and Daniel Carter stepped out into a lobby that reeked of old money and new contempt. His suit was 10 years old, bought off the clearance rack at Macy's when he was still struggling to make rent. The fabric slightly shiny at the elbows from wear. The cut dated in that way that screamed, "I can't afford better." His shoes were polished but cracked along the sides. His briefcase was scuffed leather he'd found at a thrift store, and his tie, well, his 12-year-old daughter Maya had picked it out that morning, declaring, "It vintage cool when it was really just old." Daniel looked exactly like what he wanted people to see, a man who was barely keeping his head above water, someone who didn't belong in buildings like this, someone easily dismissed and quickly forgotten. The receptionist, a young woman with perfect makeup and a smile that didn't reach her eyes, looked up as he approached. "Can I help you?" Her tone suggested she very much doubted it. Daniel kept his expression neutral, the mask he'd perfected over 43 years of being underestimated. "I have a 2 o'clock with Catherine Preston." The receptionist's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose slightly as she scanned her computer screen. "You're Mr. Carter? From Riverside Consulting?" The way she said his company name made it clear she'd never heard of it, which was exactly the point. Riverside Consulting was Daniel's deliberately small, deliberately under-the-radar firm that specialized in one thing: acquiring struggling companies, turning them around, and selling them for massive profits. Over the past 15 years, he'd built a portfolio worth $340 million, but he'd done it quietly, carefully, using shell companies and anonymous investors, because Daniel had learned early that being a successful black businessman made you a target. Better to be invisible, to be dismissed, to let people think you were nobody until the contracts were signed, and it was too late for them to sabotage you. "That's me," Daniel said, offering the receptionist his most harmless smile. She looked him up and down, taking in the cheap suit, the worn briefcase, the general air of someone who'd wandered into the wrong building. "I'll let Ms. Preston know you're here. You can wait over there." She gestured to a sitting area with leather chairs that probably cost more than Daniel's entire outfit. He sat, pulled out his phone, and pretended to check emails while actually reviewing the acquisition proposal he'd spent 3 months preparing. Preston Media was bleeding money, losing advertisers to digital competitors, drowning in debt from a series of bad investments Catherine Preston had made in traditional print media when everyone else was pivoting to online. The company was worth maybe $80 million on paper, but in practice, it was worth whatever Daniel decided to pay, because he was the only serious buyer left. Catherine Preston just didn't know it yet. The elevator dinged, and a woman strode out like she owned not just the building but the entire city block. Catherine Preston was 52, blonde, rail-thin in the way that required both money and discipline, wearing a cream-colored suit that probably cost what Daniel paid in monthly rent for the modest 3-bedroom house he shared with Maya. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no, who'd inherited her father's media empire at 25, and spent the next 27 years believing her own press releases about being a visionary leader. Daniel had read every article about her, watched every interview, and knew exactly what he was dealing with. A woman who'd been born on third base and thought she'd hit a triple, who measured worth by net worth and saw people like Daniel as fundamentally less than. Catherine's eyes swept the lobby, passing over Daniel without recognition, then returning when the receptionist pointed him out. Something flickered across her face, confusion mixed with disdain, as she took in his appearance. She walked over, her heels clicking on marble floors, and extended a hand that Daniel stood to shake. Her grip was firm, professional, but her expression was barely concealing contempt. "Mr. Carter? I was expecting someone from Riverside Consulting." "That would be me," Daniel said evenly. "I'm the founder and principal consultant." Catherine's smile was sharp enough to cut. "I see. Well, I apologize. But there's been a misunderstanding. When your assistant called to schedule this meeting, I was under the impression Riverside was a legitimate consulting firm. No offense, Mr. Carter, but you look like you can barely afford your suit, let alone advise on multi-million-dollar media companies." The receptionist's eyes went wide. Two other executives waiting in the lobby suddenly found their phones fascinating. Daniel felt the familiar burn of humiliation mixed with rage that he'd felt countless times in his life, the casual cruelty of people who believed their money made them better than him. But he'd learned to channel that feeling, to use it as fuel rather than letting it consume him. "None taken," Daniel said, his voice calm. "Though I'd suggest that judging consulting expertise by suit quality might explain some of your company's current financial difficulties, but if you'd prefer to cancel our meeting, I understand. I'm sure you have other options for turning around a company that's lost $47 million in the past 18 months. Catherine's smile froze. "How do you know that figure? Our quarterly reports haven't been released yet." "I'm thorough," Daniel said simply. "That's why companies hire me. But clearly my appearance doesn't meet your standards, so I'll see myself out." He picked up his briefcase, gave her a polite nod, and walked toward the elevator. He'd made it 3 steps before Catherine's voice stopped him. "Wait." Daniel turned slowly, saw the calculation. In her eyes, the realization that maybe she'd misjudged the situation. "I apologize, Mr. Carter. That was inappropriate. Please, let's go to my office and discuss why you requested this meeting." Daniel let a beat of silence hang there, let her feel the discomfort of waiting for his response. Then, he nodded. "Thank you, Ms. Preston. I appreciate the opportunity." As they walked to her office, Catherine attempted small talk that felt more like interrogation. Where had he gone to school? Self-taught mostly. Where was his firm based? Small office in Riverside. Nothing fancy. How had he heard about Preston Media's situation? He made it his business to know which companies were struggling. Each answer made Catherine's expression more skeptical, more certain that she was wasting her time with this nobody in his cheap suit who probably learned about business from YouTube videos. Her office was exactly what Daniel expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, modern art that was probably worth more than most people's houses, a desk that could land a small plane. Catherine sat behind it like a queen on a throne, while Daniel took the visitor's chair designed to be slightly lower, a subtle power play he'd experienced in dozens of boardrooms. "So, Mr. Carter, what exactly does Riverside Consulting do?" Daniel opened his briefcase and pulled out a thin folder, nothing fancy, just papers in a basic manila envelope. "We specialize in operational restructuring and strategic repositioning. We identify companies with good bones but poor management, acquire them, implement systemic changes, and either return them to profitability or sell them to buyers who can." Catherine's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "You acquire companies? Mr. Carter, no offense, but acquiring a media company like Preston requires capital in the tens of millions. Even if you're some kind of financial wizard, which forgive me but seems unlikely given your presentation, you'd need backing from major investment firms. Firms that would never work with someone who shows up to meetings dressed like they're interviewing for a middle management position at a struggling regional bank." Daniel let her finish, let her fully commit to her assumptions, let her dig the hole she'd soon find herself in. "You're right that acquisitions require significant capital," he said, "which is why I came, prepared with a formal offer." He slid a document across her desk. "I'm offering to purchase Preston Media for $95 million cash, with closing in 60 days. Catherine picked up the document like it might bite her, her eyes scanning the first page before she laughed again, louder this time. "This is a joke, right? You're telling me that you, a man who can't even afford a decent suit, who works out of some strip mall office in Riverside, is offering to buy my family's company for $95 million? "That's correct," Daniel said. "Though I should mention that $95 million is actually $15 million above fair market value given your current debt load and revenue decline. I'm being generous because I believe in the brand and see potential that your current leadership has failed to realize." Catherine's amusement vanished, replaced by cold fury. "Get out. Ms. Preston, get out of my office. I don't know what kind of scam you're running, but I'm not interested. Preston Media has been in my family for 3 generations. We're worth at least $200 million, and even if we were selling, which we're not, it certainly wouldn't be to some con artist who probably printed that offer letter at a FedEx office. She stood up, pointing at the door. Security will show you out if you don't leave immediately. Daniel remained seated, his expression unchanged. Before I go, you should know that I've already secured preliminary agreements with 3 of your major advertisers. They've committed to tripling their ad spend if Preston Media undergoes the restructuring I've proposed. I've also spoken with your board of directors, 6 of whom are prepared to vote in favor of this acquisition when it's formally presented next week. And I've reviewed your personal finances, Ms. Preston, including the $12 million loan you took against your shares to cover your daughter's gambling debts. You're 3 months from defaulting, which would trigger a margin call that would force you to sell anyway, but at a much lower price and with much more public humiliation. Catherine went pale, her hand gripping the desk for support. How dare you dig into my personal finances? That's privileged information. That's publicly available information if you know where to look. Daniel interrupted gently. I've done my homework, Ms. Preston. Have you done yours? Did you research Riverside Consulting before this meeting? Did you look up my name? Did you do even basic due diligence, or did you take one look at my suit and decide I wasn't worth your time? Catherine's jaw worked soundlessly for a moment before she managed. Who are you, really? Daniel stood, picked up his briefcase, and pulled out a second folder, this one thicker. Daniel Carter, MBA from Stanford, though I paid for it myself by working 3 jobs, founder and CEO of Carter Holdings, which operates under 17 different subsidiary names including Riverside Consulting. Current portfolio value, $340 million. Past acquisitions include Media Bridge Corporation, which I bought for $50 million and sold 18 months later for $180 million. TechCom Industries, purchased for $70 million, restructured, sold for $240 million. And 6 other companies you've probably never heard of because I don't advertise, I don't seek publicity, and I definitely don't waste money on expensive suits when cheap ones make people underestimate me. He placed the folder on her desk. It landed with a thud that seemed to echo in the suddenly silent office. That's my complete offer, Ms. Preston. It includes not just the purchase price, but a detailed restructuring plan that would save 90% of your current jobs, turn the company profitable within 18 months, and preserve your family's name and legacy. It also includes a position for you on the board, if you want it, because despite your appalling judgment about people's worth based on their appearance, you do know media. You're just terrible at business. Catherine sank into her chair, her hands shaking as she opened the folder and saw page after page of financial documentation, letters of intent from advertisers, board member signatures, legal opinions, everything. She'd need to verify that this was real, that the man she'd mocked for his cheap suit was actually offering to save her company from the disaster she'd created. This can't be real, she whispered. You're just some nobody. You look like you can barely afford rent. I live in a 3-bedroom house. In a working-class neighborhood, Daniel said. I drive a 12-year-old Honda. I shop at Target and eat dinner at home with my daughter every night. I don't live in a penthouse or wear designer suits or belong to country clubs because I watched my mother work 3 jobs to keep us housed and fed. And I learned that money is a tool for security and opportunity, not a costume to prove your worth. You look at me and see someone poor because you've been taught that success looks like you, sounds like you, comes from families like yours. I look at you and see someone who inherited everything and learned nothing. Catherine's eyes filled with tears she was too proud to let fall. The board meeting is next week? Tuesday, 2 p.m., Daniel confirmed. They'll vote on my acquisition offer. 6 votes are confirmed in favor, 3 against, 2 undecided. You could fight it, spend your family's remaining resources on lawyers and try to block the sale. Or you could accept that sometimes the person who can save you shows up in a cheap suit from Macy's, and pride is more expensive than humility. He walked to the door, then paused. For what it's worth, Ms. Preston, I didn't come here to humiliate you. I came here to offer a fair deal that would benefit everyone, including you. The humiliation you feel right now? That's just you experiencing what you made me feel 20 minutes ago when you judged my worth by my wardrobe. Consider it a learning opportunity. Daniel left her office, rode the elevator down 42 floors and walked out into the afternoon sunshine where his daughter was waiting at the corner cafe where he'd dropped her after school. Maya looked up from her homework, saw his expression, and grinned. Did it work? Did she totally dismiss you? Like I was invisible, Daniel confirmed, sliding into the booth across from her. Right up until I wasn't. Maya high-fived him across the table. Classic dad move. Why do you always do that? Why do you let people think you're nobody? Daniel thought about how to answer, how to explain to a 12-year-old the complicated mathematics of being a successful black man in America, the danger of being too visible, too confident, too successful in ways that made people feel threatened. Because, baby girl, the world is full of people like Catherine Preston who think they can measure your worth by looking at you. And if they see someone rich and successful, they get defensive. They make things harder. They sabotage deals because they can't stand the idea of someone like me having power. But if they see someone they can dismiss, someone they think is beneath them, they get careless. They underestimate you. And that's when you can do your best work. But doesn't it make you angry? Maya asked. Having to pretend to be less than you are? Every single time, Daniel admitted. But anger doesn't build companies or create opportunities. Strategy does. Patience does. Being willing to look weak so you can be strong when it matters, that's what wins. They ordered lunch, talked about Maya's upcoming science fair project, avoided discussing the weight of what had happened until Maya finally asked, "Do you think she'll accept your offer?" "I think she doesn't have a choice," Daniel said. "Her company is dying, and I'm offering her a chance to save it with dignity and tact. Pride might make her refuse, but eventually reality will force her hand. Either way, the board will vote in my favor, and Preston Media will become part of our portfolio. The only question is whether she's smart enough to stay, involved or too stubborn to admit she was wrong." The following Tuesday, Daniel sat in Preston Media's boardroom, wearing the exact same suit, the exact same shoes, sitting in the exact same visitor's chair, while the board of directors debated his acquisition offer. Catherine was there, pale and tense, her eyes avoiding his. 6 board members voted immediately in favor. 3 voted against. Old family friends who'd rather see the company die than be sold to an outsider. The 2 undecided members looked at Catherine, waiting for her to make the argument against, to rally them to her side. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "I'd like to amend my position. I'm voting in favor of Mr. Carter's offer, with the provision that I remain on the board and have input on editorial direction during the restructuring period." The room went silent. One of the family friends, a man in his 70s who'd known Catherine since she was a child, leaned forward. "Catherine, you can't be serious. This man is a nobody. He's trying to steal your family's legacy." "He's trying to save it," Catherine interrupted, and for the first time since Daniel had met. Her voice held something other than contempt. It held understanding, hard-won and painful. "We're losing $4 million a month. In 6 months we won't have a legacy to protect. Mr. Carter is offering us a lifeline, and I've spent the past week doing what I should have done before our first meeting, actual research. His track record is impeccable, his restructuring plans are solid, and his offer is fair, more than fair. My pride says reject it. My responsibility to our employees and this company's future says accept it." The vote was taken again, 8 in favor, 3 against. Daniel now owned Preston Media. Paperwork was signed, hands were shaken with varying degrees of enthusiasm, and within an hour Daniel was the majority shareholder of a company that had mocked him for his cheap suit. As the room cleared, Catherine approached him, her posture no longer imperious but simply tired. "I owe you an apology," she said. "A real one, not the half-hearted attempt I made in my office. What I said about your suit, about your appearance, it was cruel and unprofessional. You were right. I judged your worth by your clothes because I've been taught that success looks a certain way. I'm sorry. Daniel studied her, looking for insincerity but found only genuine regret. Apology accepted, he said. For what it's worth, you're not the first CEO to dismiss me based on appearances, and you won't be the last. I've learned to use it to my advantage. That's pragmatic, Catherine said. It's also exhausting, isn't it? Always having to prove yourself, always having to be twice as good to get half the credit. Daniel thought about his mother, about the 3 jobs, about every door that had been slammed in his face, every opportunity he'd been denied until he'd learned to make his own. It's the reality of being a black businessman in America, he said. You can rage against it or you can work within it. I chose to work within it, but that doesn't make it right. Catherine nodded. If I stay on the board, will you let me help fix this company? Really fix it, not just as a figurehead, but as someone who understands media even if I've been terrible at the business side? That's why I included you in the offer, Daniel said. You know content, you know branding, you understand the industry. You just need better financial discipline and strategic vision. I can provide that. Together we might actually build something great. Together, Catherine repeated like she was testing the word. With the man in the cheap suit. Daniel smiled. With the man who knows that suits don't make the person, but good partnership makes good business. 6 months later, Preston. Media posted its first profitable quarter in 3 years. Ad revenue was up 40% thanks to the digital pivot Daniel had orchestrated. Staff morale had improved under new management that valued employees rather than treating them as disposable. Catherine had thrown herself into editorial oversight, discovering that she was actually quite good at her job when she wasn't also trying to manage finances she didn't understand. And Daniel had added another successful turnaround to his portfolio, his net worth climbing to $380 million while he continued living in his modest 3-bedroom house and driving his aging Honda. The business press finally noticed, running profiles with headlines like The Invisible Billionaire and Why This CEO Shops at Target. Daniel declined most interview requests because publicity was still dangerous, still made you a target. But he did accept one from Preston Media's own business magazine because irony had a certain appeal. The interviewer, young and earnest, asked the question everyone wanted to know. Mr. Carter, you're worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Why do you still dress like you shop at thrift stores? Daniel thought about how to answer, about whether to give the polite deflection or the real truth. He chose truth. Because I never want to forget what it's like to be dismissed. I never want to become the person who judges someone's worth by their appearance. And I never want my daughter to think that money is what makes you valuable. I dress like this because it's a reminder that I built this empire one underestimated meeting at a time, and every person who dismissed me because of my cheap suit made it easier for me to succeed. My wardrobe is my armor and my advantage. It's how I stay hungry, stay humble, and stay ahead of people who think success only looks one way. The interview ran with a photo of Daniel in his office, wearing the same 10-year-old suit from the Macy's clearance rack, sitting behind a desk that had once been a door on sawhorses. The caption read, Daniel Carter, the man who proved that. Success isn't about what you wear, it's about what you're worth when no one's looking. Catherine sent him the magazine with a handwritten note. Thank you for teaching me that lesson the hard way. Next time someone walks into my office, I'll judge them by their character instead of their clothes. P.S. That suit is still terrible. At least let me buy you a new one. Daniel laughed, showed the note to Maya, and threw it in his Save Forever box, right next to his mother's obituary and his Stanford diploma. Then he went back to work, planning his next acquisition, wearing his cheap suit like a badge of honor, being underestimated and using it to his advantage, teaching his daughter through actions instead of words that what you wear matters far less than what you do when nobody believes in you. Years later, when Maya asked him why he'd never upgraded his wardrobe, even after becoming genuinely wealthy, Daniel would say, because the day I start dressing like I'm successful is the day people stop underestimating me, and being underestimated is the greatest competitive advantage I've ever had. And if that seemed like a harsh lesson about the world, about how society judged people, by appearances about how being black and successful required strategies that others never had to consider, well, Maya was old enough to understand that the world wasn't fair, but it could be navigated if you were smart enough to use its prejudices against itself. Daniel Carter had built an empire. In a cheap suit, not despite it but because of it. And that was a lesson worth more than any designer wardrobe could ever be.